Okay, so this is a quick one. The Green Revolution. It's a story with a fairly happy ending. There's some residual effects of it, but basically, this is science and engineering doing a great thing. Okay, so what happened was at the end of World War II, and as the world began to sort of settle down and look around, people realized, wait a second, a lot of the world's population is growing very rapidly, but the food supply for these people is not. And there's just no way for them to ever keep up the food supply at the rate they're growing. And they were going to start it. We're talking, people thought like this Malthusian catastrophe was about to happen to at the time about a quarter of the world's population, which was like over 1 billion people. And fortunately, people took it seriously. They looked at the math, they looked at the data, and said, we've got to fix this. And so what they came up with was what was now called the Green Revolution. And essentially it was uh, a multi-pronged approach at changing food production. And it resulted in saving all those people from starvation by providing with more food through better farming techniques. So essentially, the Green Revolution came down to the following things: the development of high yield crops, so you get more food out of the same area of land. Improved irrigation techniques to support those crops, the development of pesticides, herbicides, and chemical fertilizers to help these crops grow and remain healthy, and then mechanized equipment for planting, harvesting, and transporting these crops. So just a whole renovation, the entire agricultural ecosystem, really. And it was mostly attributed to one individual in particular named Norman Borlaug. So he was an American scientist, and he's considered to be the father of the Green Revolution. Mostly, what he did is he designed what we call the cultivars, the plants that were responsible for this. So uh, he basically said we need to grow plants that have more what we call photosynthates, more compounds that are produced by photosynthesis that are edible by humans. And so he did traditional cross pollination in order to get these crops to be produced, and he did it very rapidly. And then he also helped uh, push for the development of the other supportive technologies, the herbicides, the pesticides, the irrigation, and so on. And he was awarded a Nobel Prize for it in 1970. He was credited with saving the lives of 1 billion people. Now, obviously, he didn't do it alone, but I mean, that's kind of a cool thing to be told. Hey, man, you saved 1 billion people from starving to death. All right. And it's not, the Nobel Prize Committee had a point there. He really was largely responsible for this. Now, it is a happy story, but it's got its consequences, right? So the things he targeted the populations that were most at risk, and these were in Asia and in Latin America. And basically, the most food you can get out of a crop are from cereal crops. That'd be things like wheat, rice, and corn. And so, and the countries where this was most successful in being deployed were places like uh, Central America, Mexico, the Philippines, India, China. And it really did, provide these people with much needed, not just food to avoid starvation, but it actually helped them build their economies. And most of these are countries now that have pretty good economies. And it is in large part due to the economic boost they got from not just being able to not starve, but to actually be able to export food. They could grow so much. Unfortunately, the Green Revolution left out sub-Saharan Africa. Poor Africa. It just always seems to get the wrong end of the stick. So basically, what happened there was, well, you know what? They don't grow those types of cereal crops. They don't grow rice, wheat, and they grow some kind of corn, but not the same kind of corn that he was growing. They traditionally rely on plants that can survive with their normal rainfall seasons, so they don't have irrigation isn't part of what they do. They didn't have access to the needed infrastructure. They didn't have roads. They didn't have fuel. They couldn't. They couldn't. They didn't have wells for irrigation. And they also lived in countries with corrupt dictators who, when the international agencies tried to help out, a lot of the aid just didn't get to the farmers in question. So it is truly a sad thing that the Green Revolution did leave Africa out. Now, of course, one of the drawbacks, there had to be a downside to this, of the Green Revolution is that it greatly increased the amount of uh, fossil fuel needed to produce photosynthetic fuel, right? So, in other words, like what we want out of plants is energy for our bodies, And normally we just capture that from the sun. But in the Green Revolution, it takes a bit of energy from fossil fuels are needed to make the fertilizers, make the pesticides, to run your equipment, to pump your water. So, if you look at this graph here, it says, okay, look, here's how much energy you get per hectare from, in gigajoules from these different plants, right? But if you notice, you had to put in quite the black bars are how much fossil fuel you had to put in. So you still are getting clearly a great benefit from the sun, but you're also having to put in a lot of fossil fuel energy to do that. And so that's one of the drawbacks. Another drawback is that you're becoming dependent at this point. Instead of a farmer growing lots and lots of different crops, a little bit of this over here, a little bit of that over there, you just like, no, I'm just planting wheat, I'm just planting corn, I'm just planting rice. So you get these massive farms that start to happen. And there's a lack of biodiversity in that case, right? So you just have a very limited number of cultivars, very, very limited number of genetic strains. So you have very low species biodiversity, very low genetic biodiversity, and that makes these things susceptible to pests and disease. Well, what do you do about that? Well, you fight that by using things like fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides. And so that is something that I forgot to put a slide in here, but that's a big part of it, is that they had to develop these fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides in order to support these monocultures. Now, a lot of people are saying we're overdue for a new green revolution, and it is happening, and people are targeting Africa this time. Whether it'll be successful still remains to be seen, but this new green revolution comes about through the science of genetic engineering. So in genetic engineering, what you do is, let's just say the red DNA represents a plant crop. Let's just say it's a type of corn, and this type of corn needs to be irrigated or it will die. Well, there's another kind of plant, maybe not even a corn plant, that is very adept at surviving drought conditions, largely due to the protein encoded in this gene right here. So what they do is they splice out the gene from this one kind of plant that makes it resistant to drought, and they splice it into the genome of that corn plant. And now you have this new genetically modified organism, a corn plant that has a gene from a different plant spliced into it, but now you can grow corn, but it doesn't die of drought. Or you can do the same thing to make it pest resistant. It can make its own pesticides. It can be resistant to herbicides and so on. And so this is basically where the next revolution in plants comes from. Now, a lot of people are freaked out by the idea of genetically modified foods. They call them like, Franken foods or whatever. But the reality is, like that kind of has, a lot of people were upset about it at first, but it's come to be normalized. So right now, about 11% of the world's farmland is growing crops that are genetically modified. People in the United States, about 75% of the food they eat contains genetically modified plant matter. And despite the concerns that people have about it, first of all, there's not a lot of evidence suggesting that it's harming people. There are some negative things we'll talk about in a different lesson. But it maybe, just like there were some downsides to the first green revolution in terms of pesticides and herbicides and all the consequent problems that came along with that, there may be some associated with this as well. But just as the first green revolution saved 1 billion lives, this one could save even more than that. And so it is probably going to happen, and we should just embrace it. Now, but there's things like this, so there's Monsanto company has this product called Roundup. It's this broad spectrum herbicide, and what they did is they basically genetically modified plants to be resistant to their own product. And so the idea is you can buy corn from Monsanto that has a gene inserted into it that makes it not die when you spray their product on it. Everything else that's growing on your crop does. All the weeds die, but not this plant. And what unfortunately what's happening is you're causing people to be very dependent on these monocultures, and it leads to the development of things called super weeds. So anyway, that's where the world is going with this. And people right now are designing these genetically modified plants to be drought resistant, pest resistant, salinity resistance, because salinization of soils is a problem, plants that require less fertilizer. So there's a lot of potential here. There's a lot of worry too, but at least we're going into it knowing there can be a problem, where I think we went into the last green revolution, we went into it kind of blind to those problems. It led to things like bioaccumulation and Rachel Carson's silent spring because of DDT, which was an outcome of that. So anyway, that is the green revolution. Thanks for watching.